The smell of roasted turkey and brown sugar sweet potatoes had been drifting through my parents' house since 7 that morning. By the time the sun dropped below the tree line, every window was fogged from the inside, and the driveway was packed end to end with cars. My mother had set the long table with the ivory tablecloth she only brought out twice a year, and my father had already uncorked the wine and was standing at the head of the table with that particular look on his face, the one that meant he had a toast prepared and he was proud of it. I was standing near the kitchen doorway, watching it all, and I remember thinking that this was one of those evenings that would feel significant later, the kind you try to hold on to even while it's still happening. My husband was beside me, his shoulder warm against mine. He had one hand loosely around his wine glass and the other resting against the small of my back. He wasn't talking much, he rarely did in big family settings, but he was watching the room the way he always did. Quietly, carefully, taking inventory. My brother was at the center of it. He had arrived 2 hours earlier in his dress uniform, and the moment he walked through the front door, my mother had pressed both hands to her mouth and started crying before he even got his coat off. My father shook his hand and then pulled him into a hug, something I hadn't seen him do in years. My aunt had taken at least a dozen photos on her phone before my brother even made it to the living room. He stood there accepting all of it with the easy, humble smile I had known my whole life, shaking his head slightly like he was embarrassed by the attention, though I could tell he was pleased. He had been home for 3 days. He was supposed to stay through the weekend. My father raised his glass. 34 years ago, he said, your mother and I had a son, and I want you to know, he paused and cleared his throat in that way he did when he was trying not to get emotional, that I have never been more proud of anything in my life than I am of the man standing at this table. Tonight, my brother smiled and looked down at his plate. My aunt started clapping. My mother wiped her eyes with the edge of the tablecloth. I lifted my wine glass, and that was when my husband leaned down, close enough that only I could hear, and said quietly, "The ribbon rack is wrong." I didn't lower my glass right away. I turned just slightly toward him, not enough for anyone to notice. What? He was still looking at my brother across the table. His expression hadn't changed. He looked perfectly relaxed, perfectly polite, the way he always looked when something had his full attention. "The order," he said, the ribbons on his chest. "The arrangement doesn't match the awards he's described. I've been trying to work it out for the last hour." I put my glass down. My husband had spent 6 years in Army intelligence before he transitioned out and went to work for a private defense contractor. He didn't talk about most of what he'd done, and I had stopped asking specific questions within the first year of our marriage because the answers were either classified or answered in a way that made me feel like I had asked the wrong thing. What I knew about him could be sorted into 2 categories: the things he chose to share, and the much larger category of things he simply carried without comment. One thing he had never been wrong about was people. Not in the 3 years we'd dated, not in the 4 years since we'd married. He had a way of watching a room and extracting information from it that still unsettled me sometimes, even after all this time. He wasn't suspicious by nature. He was accurate. There was a difference. And I had learned to respect it, even when I didn't want to. That night, after dinner, after my father's toast had been given and received, and the dishes had been passed around and the conversation had folded back into the comfortable noise of a large family eating together, I found my husband in the kitchen. He was rinsing a glass at the sink. He had his back to me. I closed the door behind me. "Tell me what you saw," I said. He turned off the water and dried his hands and leaned back against the counter. He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was choosing how much to say. "His combat patch is on the wrong sleeve," he said. "Combat patches go on the right. His is on the left. That's the kind of mistake someone makes if they dress themselves from a photo without knowing the protocol." He paused. "The ribbons are out of precedence order. The placement doesn't match a deployment timeline that adds up." And twice at dinner he referred to his unit in a way that would have been accurate if he'd looked it up, but isn't the way anyone who actually served in that unit would refer to it. There's a shorthand. You either know it or you don't. I sat down at the kitchen table. "He could have made mistakes getting dressed," I said. "He could have just misspoken." "He could have," my husband said. "He wasn't arguing with me. He was just presenting the information." "You think he wasn't deployed?" He was quiet again. "I think it's worth finding out," he said. "I didn't sleep that night. My husband did, or at least he was very still beside me, which with him was close enough. I lay on my back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about my brother in the way you think about someone when you're trying to decide whether the version of them you've always believed in still holds. He was 3 years older than me. When I was 9 and he was 12, he had once stood between me and a boy at school who had been making my life miserable for a semester, and he had done it without anyone asking him to. He had just shown up one afternoon and made it stop. I don't know what he said. I never asked. It was just over, and he never mentioned it, and that was the kind of person I had always understood him to be. He had enlisted at 19. My parents had been frightened. I had been proud in the uncomplicated way of a 16-year-old who doesn't fully understand what she's proud of. When he came home after his first year, he seemed older in a way I couldn't articulate. Quieter in some places, louder in others, with new edges I didn't have names for yet. Over the years, the stories had accumulated. Not all at once, and not from him directly. He was careful about that. They came out at family dinners, at holidays, through my mother mostly, relayed secondhand. He had been there for this. He had done that. His unit had received a commendation. He had been recommended for something he was too modest to specify. I had never questioned any of it. I had no reason to. I lay in the dark and understood, slowly, that I might have had reasons I'd simply chosen not to use. The next morning I called my husband from the back porch while my brother was still asleep and my parents were at church. The cold had come in overnight and the grass was stiff with frost, and I sat on the porch steps in my coat with my coffee going cold in my hands. "Tell me what to do," I said. "I can make some calls," he said. He meant to people he knew, people with access to records that weren't public. He had done this before, for other reasons, and he had never been wrong about what he found. I thought about saying no. I thought about it for longer than I'd like to admit. "Okay," I said. He called back 2 hours later. My brother had enlisted. That part was true. He had completed basic training, been assigned to a stateside post, and been administratively separated 14 months later. He had never deployed. He had never been in combat. The ribbons and the patch and the commendations and the stories, none of it corresponded to a service record that existed. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after he told me. I thought about my father's toast, the ivory tablecloth, my mother's hands against her mouth. I waited until that evening to talk to my brother. My parents had gone to bed early, my father had a habit of turning in by 9, and my husband had made himself scarce in the way he did when he understood that something wasn't his to be part of. He took a book to the bedroom and closed the door, and I was alone with my brother in the living room, the two of us on opposite ends of the couch with the television on but muted. I didn't lead into it gently. I had thought about how to do that and decided it would only make it worse. "I need you to tell me about your service," I said. The real version. The change in him was immediate and complete. His face didn't go through stages. It just went still, the way a pond goes still when the wind stops. He didn't say anything for a long moment. "What did David find?" he said. And that was how I knew. Not that I hadn't already known. But hearing him ask that question, hearing him skip directly to my husband's name, meant that on some level he had always understood this was possible, that someone would eventually look, that the story had an edge, and one day someone careful enough would find it. "He found your discharge record," I said. "He found that you weren't deployed." My brother put his elbows on his knees and pressed his face into his hands. He sat that way for a while. "How long has Mom known?" I asked. He shook his head. "She doesn't. Neither does Dad. None of it is real." He looked up at that. His eyes were red. The enlistment was real. Basic was real. The 14 months at Fort Campbell were real, but not the deployment, not Afghanistan, not the commendation. He was quiet. "Why?" I said. The word came out smaller than I intended. He leaned back against the couch and looked up at the ceiling, and I watched him decide whether to give me the honest version. "When I separated," he said slowly, "it wasn't under circumstances I was proud of. I made choices. I ran with people I shouldn't have. There was an incident off-post that I don't ten." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I came home with nothing. No deployment, no record worth mentioning, just an administrative separation that I was too embarrassed to explain. And Mom and Dad had already told everyone. They'd been telling people for 14 months that I was going to Afghanistan, that I was going to do something important. And I came home and I just..." He stopped again. "I let them keep believing it," he said. "At first I thought it would only be for a little while. just until I figured out what to do next. But a little while turned into a year, and then 5 years. And then it was this, he gestured vaguely at himself, at the uniform hanging in the guest room down the hall, and I didn't know how to get out of it anymore. I looked at him for a long time. At the face I had known all my life. The person who had stood between me and harm when I was 9 years old without anyone asking him to. The Veterans Group, I said. The fundraiser last spring. He closed his eyes. He had organized a fundraiser for a local veterans support organization. He had been on a panel at a community event. He had spoken at my niece's school. That money went to real people, he said quickly. I want you to know that. I never took anything. The donations all went where they were supposed to go. I used it. I used the credibility of it. I didn't say anything. I know that doesn't make it better, he said. No, I said. It doesn't. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I sat at the kitchen table before anyone else was up, and my husband came in and made coffee without saying anything and sat across from me and just waited. That was one of the things I had come to love most about him. He knew when to wait. I don't know how to tell them, I said. He wrapped both hands around his mug. You don't have to be the one to tell them, he said. He does. I knew he was right. I also knew that saying that to my brother was going to be one of the harder things I had done. I thought about my father, about the way he had cleared his throat at the dinner table to keep from crying, about how long it had been since I'd seen him pull anyone into a hug, and how the person he'd chosen was my brother. I thought about what it would cost him to know the truth. I thought about what it was already costing everyone to not know it. I went to my brother's room at 8 in the morning. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed in jeans and a t-shirt, like he hadn't slept either. The uniform was still hanging on the back of the door. I sat in the chair near the window. You have to tell them, I said. Not me. You. Before you leave this weekend. He looked at the floor. It will destroy Dad, he said. Maybe, I said. But finding out later, finding out that we all knew and no one told him, that would be worse. For him and for you. He was quiet. I don't know how to start, he said. Start with the truth, I said. That's the only place there is to start. He put his head down. His shoulders shook once. He pulled in a long breath and held it and let it out. I didn't say anything else. I just sat there. After a while, he looked up. Will you be there? He said. When I tell them? Yes, I said. We did it that afternoon, after lunch. My husband disappeared again out to the car, ostensibly to get something, though I suspected he would find reasons to stay gone for as long as it took. My parents were in the living room. My father was in his chair with the newspaper, my mother on the couch with her book. My brother sat down across from them, and I sat in the corner near the bookshelf, and he told them. He didn't soften it. He didn't build up to it with explanations. He told them what had happened 14 months into his enlistment, the choices he'd made, the people he'd run with, the incident that had ended his service early. He told them how he'd come home and let the story continue because he hadn't known how to stop it. He told them about every family dinner and every holiday, and every moment he had sat at that table and accepted their pride and known he didn't deserve it. He told them about the Veterans Group. He told them that the money had gone where it was supposed to go, but that he had borrowed credibility he hadn't earned. When he was done, the room was very quiet. My mother was looking at her hands in her lap. My father had set the newspaper down at some point and was looking at a spot on the floor between his feet. No one spoke for almost a full minute. Then my father said, "How long ago was the incident? The one that ended your service?" My brother told him. My father nodded slowly. He was quiet again. "And you've been carrying this for all that time?" It wasn't a question. My brother didn't answer it as one. "Yes," he said. My father rubbed one hand slowly over his face. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling, and I watched him process it the way he processed everything difficult, slowly, methodically, without rushing to a response before he'd thought it through. My mother reached out and put her hand on my brother's knee without saying anything. He looked at her hand and then looked away quickly, his jaw tight. "The Veterans Group," my father said. "You told them?" My brother looked at him. "Not yet. I'll call them this week. I'll explain it." My father nodded. "And the fundraiser committee?" "Yes." "Okay," my father said. And that was the whole of his reaction to the lie, at least in that room on that afternoon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't say what I might have expected him to say. He just sat there and processed it and came out the other side with a plan. I had always underestimated my father. Later, after my brother had gone to sit on the back porch and my mother had gone to the kitchen and the room was just the two of us, my father looked at me from his chair. "David found it," he said. "Yes," he nodded. "Good," he said. "Good that someone did." My brother left Sunday morning. He hugged my parents at the door, not in uniform this time, just in jeans and his old gray sweatshirt, which somehow made him look younger and more like himself at once. He held my mother for a long time. My father shook his hand and then kept hold of it. "You make it right," my father said. "That's all. You just make it right." My brother nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. He hugged me last, at the car. "Thank you for staying in the room," he said, meaning when he told them. "I told you I would," I said. He got in the car and sat there for a moment before he started it. Through the windshield, I could see him take a long breath. Then he put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway, and I watched him until he turned onto the main road and was gone. My husband came to stand beside me on the front walk. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. He thought about it the way he thought about everything carefully, without rushing. "He took something that wasn't his," he said. "He put it back. That's a hard thing to do." He paused. "Yeah, I think he'll be okay." I thought about my brother at 12 years old, standing between me and something that wanted to hurt me, doing it without anyone asking him to. I thought about how that version of him had been real and was still real, even alongside every other version that had come after. I thought about how people were almost never only one thing. We stood there until the cold got to us, and then we went inside. That was 8 months ago. My brother called the veterans group 2 days after he got home. He called the fundraiser committee. He wrote a letter to the organization that had invited him to speak at my niece's school. I don't know all of what happened after those calls. He didn't share every detail. And I didn't ask, but I know that he stepped down from the board of the veterans group, and I know he's been volunteering there since, quietly and without the uniform, doing whatever work they need done. He came to my parents' house for Easter in April. He drove up on a Friday evening, and we all had dinner together, and no one put the ivory tablecloth out, and no one made a formal toast, and it was better for it. He and my husband sat on the back porch after dinner while my mother and I did the dishes, and I could hear them out there talking not about any of this, just talking, and there was something in the sound of it that settled something in me I hadn't known was still unsettled. My father said something to me that weekend, on Saturday morning, while we were drinking coffee at the kitchen table before anyone else was up. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the kind of courage it takes to tell the truth after you've been lying for a long time." He turned his mug in his hands. "It's different from the kind it takes to tell the truth right away. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder. Every year it sits there, it gets heavier and harder to lift." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't love what he did, but I've been thinking about what it took to put it down. I thought about that for a long time after. I'm still thinking about it." My husband, when I told him what my father had said, was quiet for a moment. "Your father is a wise man," he said, "and that, I think, was the truest thing said about the whole of it."